Hello, Out Entrepreneurs. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to episode number 22 of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. On today's show, I am so happy to host a fellow West Coaster and boss, Dr. Jonathan Higgins. Dr. John, are you ready to inspire fellow out bosses?
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being on the show. A little bit about Dr. John. He's a speaker, educator, and thought leader, and is a proud Southern California native. He serves as an LGBTQ media curator, focusing on the needs of queer people of color, and his work has been featured in Mused Magazine, Contrast Magazine, and on sites like Blavity, The Root, and Attention. Dr. Higgins just recently completed a TEDx talk on the process of unlearning fear and embracing personal power, and is a faculty member of this year's Campus Pride Summer Campus. So, Dr. John, thank you again for being on the show. I love that your focus is really about unlearning fear and embracing personal power. That is such an important skill to master when you're an out person in general and when you're starting your own business. So I'm sure there's a ton of stuff that you're doing as an influencer, but right now, what's one thing that's most unique about what you're doing and how you're getting your message out to the world?
I think the one thing that's most unique about kind of what I'm doing is the clientele or the folks that I'm focusing on. Traditionally, we've had social media curators, specifically LGBTQ ones, who only really kind of focus on LGBTQ issues, but no one really focuses on the intersectional experiences of queer people. And so in my work, I really stress and I emphasize the work of Kimberly Crenshaw around this idea of not just, recognizing that, yes, we do have layers and we have different experiences, but ultimately these experiences that are locked in oppression, right? And so when you're oppressed as a person that identifies as queer, that's one facet of someone's experience or journey, right? And so when I use my voice or when I curate or when I create a video or when I'm interviewing or whatever I'm doing, I'm always trying to look at the other elements of what affects a person's life. So if they're a woman of color, or if they're a queer person of color, or if they come from other elements of a marginalized background, maybe they're undocumented. What does that mean for someone's lived experience? And so I appreciate other curators like, Jessica Lee, and you have Tyler Oakley, and you have a lot of folks who are really trying to elevate the needs around social justice and things. But I don't know if there are any other curators out there who are focusing on the intersectional experiences and really, really positing those experiences around the oppression that's out there, and how do we, not necessarily how do we just end it, but how do we bring people to a consciousness of understanding what that oppression looks like, right? So I think that that's the one thing that makes me different from other media curators is, yes, I love to have fun. I will crack jokes on my, my Twitter. And I have had people stop me and say, oh my God, I love your Twitter. It's so funny. But I think at the end of the day, there are moments where I will take a moment to step back and I'll say, let me step back from what everyone else is doing. And let's talk about what's really real here and what's really salient and what's necessary to have conversations around. So that's what really makes my framework or my organization, whatever you want to call it, that's what makes it different.
Yeah, your use of humor and being able to crack jokes, and at the same time taking a concept like Dr. Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality. This is something that's been around since the 90s, at least in academia, and bringing that to life, connecting people and all of their different aspects of their identities, and showing how that shows up in the world, and especially looking at oppression and marginalization, at certain aspects of our identities. And so really amazing stuff. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It's absolutely needed. And I think one other thing that you mentioned is this, like having that niche, recognizing, hey, there's a lot of media curators out there. There's a lot of LGBT folks doing this, but not in the unique way that I'm contributing. And I think that that's always, as an influencer, as a business owner, that's the thing. That's the secret sauce that makes you desirable, and people they want more of what you're putting out there. Mm-hmm. So you're inspired about a lot of things, but what's the one thing right now when you think about all of the work that you're doing, all of the media curation that you're putting out there, what is that one thing that has you most inspired today?
keeps me inspired is, so I've had maybe 2 or 3 instances, maybe in like the last 2 weeks, and I've gone, that's why I do it. So I had the pleasure this week to be a correspondent for RuPaul's Drag Con. And, being press and being in the space, it was really cool to be around other influencers. I mean, I got to meet T.S. Madison, and we had a quick conversation, and I was able to catch up with Todrick, and I was also able to see Ross. And so knowing there are a lot of figureheads who are really, Ross Matthews. And so being able to see so many different people who have, kind of started out where I was and have really been able to make an impact within the community, specifically the LGBTQ community, that was what inspired me. But I think what inspired me the most was having a young woman come up to me and she said, hey, I follow you on Twitter, and I don't know if you know, but it was because of you that I started interning for the It Gets Better Project, and now I work for the It Gets Better Project. And I just want to say thank you so much for using your voice to inspire people like me to be able to do what I'm now doing. And so in that moment, that was what initially said, okay, you know what, I am in the right lane. And I think that it's very interesting because, a lot of people see, so for instance, I started Dr. John Paul about 8 months ago, right? And years before that, back in like 2005, I had a Facebook/MySpace channel, and I was doing all these different things, and it never took off the way that it has now. And so now to be in this place where I'm almost at, 10,000, subscribers on Twitter, and I have, all of these different people reaching out to me on YouTube and different orgs wanting to work with me. I think what's so inspirational is knowing that I feel like for the first time, people are recognizing the voices of queer people of color and are saying it's not just an idea of, oh, let's bring their voice in because it's good for media or it's good for TV or whatever. It's because we all know that it's a group of lived experiences that are rarely ever given attention. And so when I have a QPOC person come up to me and say, thank you so much for saying what you say, saying it how you say, you're inspiring me to do what I want to do in my life, or inspiring me to look at life in a different lens, I think that that's the one reason why I go, this is why I do this now, right? Like, this is the reason why I never gave up on it. And this is the reason why I'm continuing to really push the envelope and to get into companies or to work with orgs that traditionally have been white. I've worked with several companies in the last few weeks, and I have a couple of other companies I'm in the current, in talks with to work with that I've known have been traditionally white. And so now being able to tell other Black, brown, trans, whoever, that they too can get into these conversations and get to the table and change the way things look, that inspires me beyond words.
This is huge. You have an enormous audience, both online and out in the real world. Mm-hmm. And it's clear people are hungry for what your perspective, the perspective of queer people of color. And especially when you think about traditional organizations, dominant white culture, I think that this is a moment that is changing and you're leading that way. So again, thank you for doing that. And thinking about your own journey, for many entrepreneurs or influencers like yourself, it seems like we're called to start out on our own for one of two reasons, sometimes a little bit of both. But one is that we either feel a calling to pursue a purpose-driven idea, or two, we can't conform any longer to dominant culture, and however you define that. And so I'm really curious for you, Dr. John, which one of these motivators resonates more for you and why?
My husband jokes with me often. He says, you don't work well with people. And and it's, there's some truth to that. And then there's a bit of a lie. I think what really got me started was me knowing that. So, and I always tell people this, I think it's, we in our culture, we oftentimes will shame someone for saying, oh, I want to be famous, right? I want people to know me. And growing up as a kid, I always felt that way. And when I give my speeches, when I talk to people, when I'm at different institutions and I talk about where I'm at and what I'm doing with my work, I always say from a very young age, I always told my mom, everyone would always ask me, what do you want to do when you get older? And I would always say, I want to be famous. And I never really knew what I was going to do to be famous. But I would always say that fame was always something I wanted. But as I got older and I started saying, okay, well, I want to be a singer. And that didn't pan out. And I was like, okay, well, then now I'll try doing what everyone else is doing. I'll start blogging. And that didn't work out. And so I was like, okay, well, then I'll be famous in education. And, and now, I'm starting to get, I would say, movement in that way. What I learned in my own journey and talking about, what made me really want to start this was hearing people constantly tell me in certain avenues, like, you have such a big voice and your voice is so inspirational. And learning that there are people, there are two things that I kind of live as like antidotes in my life. One, when people are very insecure, they'll deflect that insecurity onto you. And I've had that happen to me in several points of my life. But the bigger piece is how powerful you become when you truly know who you are and you truly find out what you've been called to do in this life. And so for me, when I went out on my venture to become a singer and that didn't work out, and I had a few other things happen to me maybe in the last 5 to 6 years, what my true calling was truly understanding what the universe put me here to do. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. I'm making videos. I'm telling people you can be Black, queer, and live and love in those intersections and not have to worry that you have to play this mass game of moving from one identity to the other or whatever the case may be. And so to the point of, what really truly made me kind of start this journey was me recognizing that, yes, I want the fame and I want to be known for what I'm doing, but I want to be famous for the right reasons. And I think that's the thing that really drives me as it stands right now. And I'm pushing in terms of my business and the growth of my brand. It's really this idea of saying you can have everything that you want, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And so when I'm talking to people about, yes, I'm working with WOW on this, or I'm at DragCon, or I'm flying out to do X, Y, and Z, I'm not going out for the simple line of vanity. When I was at DragCon, I was seeking out drag queens who specifically looked like me and lived like me. And I was asking them, what inspires you to be who you are? So we could get that message out to other young kids or young people out there who are looking at these drag queens and going, they represent me in some way, shape, or form. So I didn't go to DragCon just to go to DragCon to say I'm there and I'm interviewing people. No, I went there with the intent of I'm going to connect with people who can tell a story and that can speak to my story. And so I think it really comes down to this idea of what's my true intent. And my true intent has always been to live authentically in my truth and to tell my story the way that the universe wants me to tell it. And so that's exactly what I've been doing for the last 8 months.
You're absolutely purpose driven. And I love what you said. You can have everything that you want so long as you're doing it for the right reason, and staying rooted in that as you continue to grow, as people continue to seek you out. You've achieved this vision that you had for yourself as a young person. It's just kind of like, it changed. Maybe you're not this famous singer or actor, but you clearly have this enormous platform and you're using it for the right reason in educating. And so I tip my hat to you for them for that. And kind of on the topic of workplace culture, what's one thing that you do when you're out there, when you're using your platform to create a more inclusive environment for those folks that are either following you, engage with you, or working with you, especially for people who feel excluded by dominant culture?
Yeah, I lead with empathy. Telling my story, I do have a master's degree in management, and my master's degree in management, I was so fortunate to have a degree that really taught me the importance of emotional intelligence. And while folks think emotional intelligence is this idea of, okay, how do you lead from this place of authenticity, or how do you lead from this place of being impact driven, right? You want to impact the people that you work with and make them feel like they're valued. There's a key component that I think is often missed, and I think it's empathy. And I think that's the reason why people love working with me. And I think that's the reason why people always will call me back. And there have been moments, I'll be very honest, there have been moments where I've detached from empathy and I've kind of been a little too raw. And people are like, okay, whoa, Dr. Higgins, you're out there. And I get it. Well, people have to say, come back in, but I will say that for the most part, on any given day, regardless of what venue I'm in, I always look for empathy, or look for ways that I can show empathy. And I think that's the key to having an effective business is when, I always tell people there's a very fine line between being a great manager, there's a fine line between being a great leader, and there's a fine line between being an emotionally intelligent leader. And when you can look at all three of those facets to build you up to a place to where you're no longer just telling someone what to do, but you're telling someone, hey, let's step back and let me ask you what your purpose is. What were you put here? Why are you here? What are your strengths, right? What are we using Strength Quest? Or are we using, other tools to figure out what other folks' strengths are? Okay, let's take those strengths and let's build them and let's add purpose and value to the work that you're doing. Or even, in conversation, right? I like to ask people, how are you doing? And sometimes people will ramble off and I'll stop and I'll go, no, wait a second. I ask you how you are doing. You're telling me everything else that's going on around you. That's not what we're here for. I want to know how you're doing. And when you can do that to someone or for someone, I've had, again, students come up to me and go, "Oh my God, you've made such a lasting impact on me." And it's because, again, I've learned to really lead from a place of empathy, because at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. I mean, outside of everything else, yeah, we're all dealing with something. We're all dealing with different struggles. But if you can really connect to those struggles and say, what can I do for you in the 30 minutes, the hour and 15 minutes, the hour and 30 minutes that we're together? What can I genuinely do to make you feel like your life is worth something, or that your journey is really worth something? I think that that's what adds so much value and so much love to the work that I do.
Just be nice and lead with empathy. That piece on emotional intelligence, I don't know in business schools today how much of that is being focused on versus the focus on managing systems and managing projects. But you're only as good as your people, and you really need to build them up. And it sounds like that's your go-to, that you're really in the business of looking at the people that are surrounding you and lifting them up. And I give you a lot of credit for that, because not everyone in leadership positions has those skills, unfortunately. And I think if they did, the world would be a very different place. So I'd love to pivot just a little bit now and focus in more on your identity, and specifically thinking about your LGBTQ identity. Did that influence your journey to create this business of yours, to create the motivation of curating media for queer people of color? Was that your motivator?
Yes and no. I've done a lot of my work around LGBTQ issues. And one of my quotes that I always lead with is that my existence is resistance. And I always lead from that frame, because when I go into spaces, I can always tell how someone's going to respond to me. I'm either going to get a visceral response of, "Oh my God, I love you. Come on in here. You're great. We really like who you are," etc. Or I get people who are literally on the totally polar opposite. And for years, I internalized that. And for years, I would always internalize, why do people hate me, or why do people not like me, or why do people have an issue with me, or whatever the case may be. And as I've gotten older, I'll be 32 this year. It was almost like a light bulb went off last year, back in June, when I started this journey, that it was about me being able to get people to understand that it's not about what other people tell you about yourself, if that makes sense. It's about you living and walking in your authentic truth. And so being queer is a part of my authentic truth, right? I don't lead from that place. I also don't lead from being Black, right? Like, so we have movements, the Black Lives Matter movement, or we have the NAACP. Those are a lot of groups or organizations that lead from a place of centering their racial experience. But for me, in my journey, I said, those are parts of my journey that I highlight. But what my ultimate message is, the joy in being able to walk and express myself in the work that I do in an authentic way, to show people what authentic truth looks like. And so one of the quotes that I used in my TED Talk was a quote from RuPaul, where, they said, "What other people think about me is none of my business." And I genuinely lead from that place now, because again, it's real easy to be so caught up in what other people think or feel about you. And so in my work, I've gotten to a place where I said, I'm going to speak my truth. And if people don't like it, then it's not for them. And I think that that's really what it comes down to. If you don't like the fact that I curse, then okay, then don't read my tweets. If you don't like the fact that I speak about Black issues and I speak about white supremacy, and I speak about all these other pieces that are there, then again, don't subscribe to my YouTube page. Don't add me on Twitter. Like, I tell people that I'm not for everybody, and I get it. But I think at the end of the day, being a queer person of color who is confident enough to say, yes, I'm going to walk fully in my truth, I think, yes, that does shape a lot of what I do, but it's not really the full scope of why I do what I do. I think it's just, again, it's one of those elevators that really help me center the work that I do and why I do the work that I do.
I love the reference to RuPaul. What other people think about me is none of my business. Internalizing that takes time in a culture where there's the vanity of social media, the vanity points of, did someone like this post, or did they not, and why not? And it sounds like you've done a lot of work around that, just to kind of tune out the perceived opinions of other people and just lead with authenticity, and allowing different aspects of your identity to be a part of that. But as you said, you're not centering where you're leading from around being Black or being LGBT, et cetera. And so I think that's really helpful. And I also know that it's sometimes difficult in practice. And so I'm wondering, has there been a time in the work that you're doing that has been difficult because of being queer, because of being Black, looking at the intersections of those two identities, where you were nervous because it could have compromised business or it could have compromised the opportunity to have a big stage like at the TEDx talks or et cetera. Can you share with us a really specific example where you really had to actively manage the perceived fears? And then how did you work to overcome that? Because I think that's going to be really helpful for our listeners who are managing aspects of either their sexual orientation or their gender identity and concerned that starting their own business and being authentic, that either it's not possible or it's going to limit their growth.
I spoke about maybe 3 or 4 really personal things in my TED Talk. And there were 2 things going into that I knew that I was going to compromise by doing that talk. I knew that I was going to compromise family relationships. And I also knew that I was going to, maybe there were going to be some relationships with people around me that might, even people in the space who might not be comfortable with me sharing, experiences related to my queer identity. And so getting on a stage and again, speaking from an authentic place, it was a very difficult task. Even in building my talk, right? Working with the person who helped me build my talk, there were a lot of things that they were trying to pull out of me that I was really scared of, like, oh, no, I don't really want to do that. I don't know if I don't know when that goes live, how that will sit with people that might know me very well, et cetera. And so when you really think about what it means to kind of start your own business or start your own, what I like to call your own pathway, right? There's this idea kind of going back to what I stand on, this authenticity. How much of you are you going to give out to the public? And I go back and forth with that. Like yesterday, I tweeted something that was extremely personal for me. I haven't had the best relationship with some of my family members. And it's not an in particular family member. It has always been my family at large. And so yesterday I was tweeting, being in a place where you feel like the world is slowly starting to open up for you and not having any family to reach out to share that with, it's painful. So I can hide that. I can hide behind my blue check on Twitter. I can hide behind all of the pictures and all of the smiles that I post from all of the events that I'm doing. But there's still this part of me that's still, somewhat hurting from not having, quote unquote, this personal family. While I have a family I've built, I still don't have the personal family relationship that I would love to have. And so when you go out and you share that authenticity, you are putting yourself at a place to where now people are no longer just seeing you as a brand, but they're seeing you as human. And I think that that's the big deal, in all that I've been doing. It's really about taking that risk of being authentic. And I say, I'm fortunate that I've had such a great response from my authenticity. I've had people tweet me or DM me and say, thank you for saying that. Oh my God, I'm going through that too. And it sucks, but it's nice to know that even someone who has who's on your wavelength or at your caliber feels the same way that I feel too, and I'm like, yeah, we're all human and we're all going through it. But I also think the other thing too, it's, when you don't, my biggest struggle has been when you don't see yourself in certain venues. And so even just thinking about who I am and what the LGBTQ community stands for, the LGBTQ community is extremely white and it's extremely skinny. And I'm none of those things. And so when I pitch, again, these are not companies I'm working with, but if I was to go pitch at like New Now Next, or if I was going to pitch at WOW, or if I was going World of Wonder, if I'm going to pitch to, Out Magazine, all these different things, I don't see myself in these venues. And so I think that's another part of the authenticity, is saying, am I going to do my best to try to subscribe to what they want? Or am I just going to say, this is who I am, here I am, take it as it is. And if you don't want to work with me, fine. And that's what I've had to do in the last few months. I have my manager meetings every Wednesday, and I'll throw, me and my manager will kiki about what the week has been like. And then she'll come around and she'll say, okay, so what are you working on? Or what are you wanting to do next? And I'll throw something at her and she'll sometimes say, okay, the history with that company. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I think it's a good idea. And sometimes it really is about that struggle of me having to push my way into something because, again, these companies don't know what to do with someone like me. And I think that's the biggest thing. When you're chubby and you love yourself for being chubby, and when you're Black and you love all of your Blackness, and you're queer and you love all of your queerness, some companies don't know how to work with that because, again, our media works off this deficit model. What can I sell you to make you feel better about who you are because you feel like you're lacking something? And so when it comes down to me, I'm a person that walked into a room that says, I love myself 100%. They look at me and go, ooh, we're not in the business of that. And so sometimes it becomes a struggle to say, Am I going to subscribe to what this company wants me to be, or am I going to say I'm okay with losing out on this check or on this money because I refuse to fold? And I think that's the biggest thing. The overarching piece is the authenticity that's there. And I think that's been my biggest struggle is how real do I stay, or how much of myself do I scale back so that way I can keep the checks coming in, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. And you've given so much to inspire folks just thinking about getting started. And I love the question that you stated, how much of yourself are you going to give out to the public, and that risk that you said it's a risk taking with being authentic and vulnerable. And as you're working with media, traditional media, like, well, I'm not going to say any of the magazines, but this perception that the LGBT community is only white and only skinny, and you're out there busting these myths left and right, because that's not true. We know that that's not true. And that's what's attracting some of these LGBT media sources and others to kind of say, whoa, this person has a completely new message, or, probably in their minds, here's a new market that we can market to, but it's allowing you to not compromise who you are. And I think that's so important. And clearly that's opened up a ton of opportunities for you. And it's just like really clear with the audience that is following you. The message that you're giving to people is long overdue, and you're inspiring others to be brave enough to take that risk and be authentic. So with that, we're going to just take a quick sponsorship break. But when we get back, please stick around, because we're going to learn more about Dr. John and ways to stay in touch with his business.
HR and diversity professionals. Are you struggling with engaging LGBTQ talent? Do you stay awake at night worrying about limiting litigation risks? Have you considered seeking support around these concerns, but just aren't sure where to turn? Look no further. Rhodes Perry Consulting offers you solutions with the Engaging LGBTQ Talent A to Z certification. This proven 4-week mentorship program delivers skills, offers support, and connects you with other professionals committed to transforming themselves and their workplaces. Learn more about this cutting-edge program by visiting rhodesperry.com and use the promo code RPC for a 10% discount. Take action and visit rhodesperry.com.
Welcome back, Outbosses. We are now going into our bonus round where we'll have the chance to get to know Dr. John just a little bit better, gain some insights on how we can bring our whole selves to work, and then learn how to stay in touch with Dr. John after today's conversation. Dr. John, are you ready for some quick fire questions?
I am.
Yes. Okay. So, did your LGBTQ identity hold you back from taking the entrepreneurial leap, or did it speed up the process?
It sped up the process.
Excellent. And in one sentence, what does it mean to bring your whole self to work?
Be non-apologetic.
Love it. And what's one personal habit that helps you master yourself and your business?
Staying focused and having a clear set goal.
Yeah, I like that. There's an acronym called FOCUS, which is finish one course until successful.
Yes.
And I love that. It's so great. So can you share a book or a podcast that has contributed to your success as an influencer in your field?
Yes. Oh, so the podcast that has saved me is The Friend Zone. Hey Friend Hey is another social media influencer, and I always take a moment to plug her because if it wasn't for her, I would not be where I am. Yes.
I will definitely include those in the show notes. So Dr. John, can you share one piece of advice to inspire the next generation of outbosses to take the entrepreneurial leap?
Don't let yourself be silenced. Regardless of if someone tells you what you say is not what they like or etc., do not allow yourself to be silenced. Continue to keep speaking your truth.
Find your voice, and one of those ways is exactly what you're doing. You're putting out original content all the time. You're making that available, and that in and of itself is inspiring so many other people to find their voice. So excellent advice. So Dr. John, thank you so much for your time and for inspiring fellow outbosses. Before we go, can you share one way that we can stay in touch with you and your business?
Okay, so you can always check me out at www.doctor, and that's, you have to spell it out, it's DOCTOR, John Paul, that's JONPAUL.com, or you can add me on Twitter at the same handle, Dr. John Paul.
All of that will be included in the show notes. So outbosses, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. It is always my pleasure to connect with you and so many inspiring outbosses like Dr. John. As a next step, check out the show notes for highlights from today's conversation. Subscribe to the podcast and consider leaving a rating and review in iTunes. And for now, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.